you all for being here. When Vicki asked me to speak at Creative Mornings, of course I said yes, because I love this community. I love what it's all about. I love the idea of people coming together around important things that matter, to form little intentional communities around stuff. So of course I said yes, and so and then Vicki said, okay, oh yeah, by the way, the theme's magic. Okay, magic, all right. So I put together a bio and a photo, and then I jotted down on the same document some potential ideas for talks. And one of them on this list was the magic of being human. Sent it over to Vicki. 20 minutes later, there it is, Facebook, Twitter, thousands of people's inboxes, Matt Trinetti and the magic of being human. So here we are. And so for the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to take us on a journey, and we're going to solve potentially the biggest life question of all. What does it mean to be human? So a couple of questions I'd like to float out into the room right now. One of them is, why am I here? Like literally, why am I standing here in this room right now? And the second question is who am I? Like literally, like who's this guy Matt that is standing before you and you're sitting here listening to? And actually, on the flip side of that, why are you guys here? Like, why did 100 some odd people come to see some guy? I don't know if you know me or not, or know Escape the City, but you know, why is everyone here today? And so I have a couple answers in my head. I was like, well, maybe people just are really into the Creative Mornings community, and this is something you come to. Okay, I can understand that. Maybe you're a human, and you know the idea of what the magic of being human is a topic that intrigues you. Maybe you are familiar with the company I work with, Escape the City, and the work that we do there. Maybe you've read something that I've written, seen a talk that I've given. Or maybe you're like, oh crap, wait, where am I? Where's Chris the Tippet? I'm actually in the wrong place. So these are kind of the things that I thought, and actually if the topic is what it means to be a human, or the magic of being human, I think these two questions, why am I here and who am I, are kind of at the crux of that conversation. And so I'd like to talk about those a little bit. So. Why am I here? So I'm here because of my work at Escape the City, and also I think I'm here because of my work as a writer. I have a blog, GiveLiveExplore.com. It's me on the right, and I write here, and I've been writing on here for the past 4 years. So that's one reason, and that's actually a reason that led me to Escape the City, was through my writing and telling my story, leaving IBM and embarking on a new path. And who am I? So if I'm brave enough, I'll also say that's who I am. I'll say I'm a writer, I'm a speaker, I'm a designer of transformational education programs at Escape the City, which is we help people who are feeling unfulfilled in their work find more fulfilling work, kind of find direction, and help answer some of these big questions. And I say if I'm brave enough, because to say that I am a writer, that I am a speaker, to say specifically that I'm a writer, feels fraudulent and awkward and sacrilegious for two main reasons. Number one, I've never studied writing. Actually, quite the opposite. I studied engineering. So I spent 5 years studying engineering at Georgia Tech in Atlanta in the US. And then I spent another 5 years working at IBM as an IT management consultant. So 10 years. The most compelling thing, and if it was compelling, that I had written before I started this blog was maybe an email. Like, maybe a persuasive email, probably a really crappy email. But that's the only writing that I had really done. And so never studied it. And number two, actually the last time that I did try to study writing, I failed at it. And this is something I don't really talk about much, it's not exactly a point of pride. But before university, I'd like to say I'm fairly bright guy, and I got into, in the US we have AP classes. I don't know if you have an equivalent, but basically it's advanced placement. It's kind of like the highest level of class you can take. So in math and science and English, I was in these AP classes. And I was in AP English in my senior year of high school. And the first semester I got a C. So we do A, B, C, D, F, which isn't failing, but apparently that got me kicked out of AP English. And it was the first time I probably ever got a C, and it was, I basically, I didn't flunk, but I got put down into the lower level English class. So the last time I actually tried to study English, I failed massively. And so that's why when I say when I'm brave enough, because it feels completely fraudulent to call myself a writer. And yet that's a big part of what I do. And actually, not only that, but it's not only that I've assumed this identity of a writer, and it's at contrasting of all of my assumed and inherited identities. And so actually, writer is the identity that I've chosen to own. That's something that I've picked. And this goes against, this is the opposite of inherited identities. So inherited identities as in the things I was born with. I was born a son to two parents. I'm an older brother. I'm an American. I'm from Ohio. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. So I'm actually a European American, third generation, great grandson of European immigrants. So these are all things that I've assumed. By being born into the world, these are my identities. So to contrast that, to say I'm a writer, it's actually the first one that maybe I've deliberately chosen. And so that's why it feels really strange, especially in lieu of never studying it and actually failing at it when I've tried before. And actually, not only that, can I say I'm a writer, but I've, oh, I need a clicker. There it is. So there's Escape the City, forgot to do that. So big questions, failed. Slides obviously were made after the fact. So the other thing, that it's not only can I call myself a writer, but, and I share these not to like, I share these to show a point, that some of my writing has been shared by people that I admire, some of my heroes. And so not only I'm saying writer, but I'm getting some sort of validation from the people that I really respect. Paulo Coelho, or Tim Ferriss, or Gary Vaynerchuk, Arianna Huffington. So not only can I call myself a writer, but some of the people I respect most have also, in some way, by sharing my writing, have called me a writer. Now, in the grand scheme of life, this actually doesn't matter. Like, nothing. Okay, wow, la-di friggin' da. But what it says, and what the story that I take away from this, is that in 2013, there's over 150 million blogs out there. And I don't know how many there are today, with things like Medium.com. Pretty much anyone can and is a writer. You sign up to Medium and you post something, all of a sudden you're a writer. So I don't know what that number is now, but it's got to be much greater than that. But somehow over the years, since I started writing, since a flunked, failing, fraudulent engineer posing as a writer became a writer, somehow I've managed to poke my head above a crowd of millions. And so what I'd like to explore here today is why I think that is. And I actually think there's only really one reason that I can point to. And it's that in my work, in my writing, I prioritize my humanity and my willingness to show up as a human as more important than the medium itself. More important than the tools, the techniques. The medium is choosing to show up as a human, as someone saying, I don't have this all figured out, but here I am anyway. Here I am, flawed, incomplete, figuring this shit out as I go. And that's the only thing that I can say how I've managed to pop my head up a little bit. And it's not just me, it's lots of people. I'm sure some of you in this room, you've managed to pop your head. And this is what I think it goes back to, is that the humanity is more important than the medium. So what I'd like to, I guess the next 10, 15 minutes, the theme, what I'd like to offer to the room is maybe some thoughts, some ideas on what it means to be human and how we can embrace our own humanity in our work, in our life. Because actually those two are so intertwined together right now. And so I have a few thoughts, but really this is just meant to maybe spark some thoughts with you. So this is through my own experience, my own story, but also other things I've noticed. So the first point, the first thought I'll say is be willing to learn in public. And when I started my blog, so I want to take you back to 2012. Why did I even do this? I was working at IBM. Why did I start writing? Why did I start traveling? So 2012, long story short, I had a friend who was killed unexpectedly in a car accident. And that next week, I, armed with kind of all these unrealized dreams, came to the forefront. And in particular, I had this dream of going on a slow traveling, long-term adventure. And really, this is just to explore the world at my own pace. In the US, we get these neatly partitioned, like, 2-week holidays, like literally 10 days max. That's what we get. So I'd go like in these far-flung places and try to do as much as I could, but it really wasn't satisfying something within me. So that's what I had. I had my friend's death, and I had these unrealized dreams. And those are really the only two things I had with me. And so the next week after her death, I booked a one-way ticket to Iceland, which sounds really badass, except I booked it like 6 months in advance. So I was like, okay, I have 6 months to like figure my shit out. Friends, family, all that stuff. And then right before I went to Iceland, so I started in Iceland, I really just wanted to explore Northern and Eastern Europe. So that's 7 months, I just wanted to do things really slowly. So I spent a lot of time in Iceland and some of the Baltic countries and the Balkans. But really just at my own pace. I wanted to really dive, soak the marrow out of these places and really understand them. The same time I went to Iceland, I decided to start my blog, Give, Live, Explore. And and it started, I was sharing fun travel pictures, and here's a story of me, and I convinced 2 friends to come to Iceland with me, here's a story of that. But what it quickly was becoming, and I quickly realized this, is it was actually becoming a canvas upon which for me to explore my big existential questions, these who am I, why am I here type questions. More specifically, I was admitting a few things. One, I actually had no clue who I was. 2, I didn't know what I wanted my life to be about. 3, I had no idea where or how the hell to figure out 1 and 2. And 4, that understanding these things seems like a pretty important part of being a human, and that I should probably get going with them and try to begin to explore this stuff. So I started writing, and really so it became this open canvas, and I started sharing not only my questions about who I was, what I was all about, but also just what's my philosophy in life, what do I want out of life? And so my blog became this open canvas. And really what it became was I was kind of learning in public. Not only just learning how to write in public, which can feel awkward enough and vulnerable enough, but I was also learning who I was in public. And I found this to be really, really powerful. And I think, going back to the humanity over the medium, I think this is the reason why people started following. Because I was sharing something that was striking a chord within other people. And one of my, taking it to another example, you guys familiar with Rain Pickings? Maria Popova, it seems like a very Creative Mornings crowd thing. She's great, I admire her, another one of my heroes. But I've heard her on a couple different podcasts, and she's explained her site, Brain Pickings, as a documentation of my own becoming. And I think that's really amazing. And when I look at Give, Live, Explore in my writing, that's what it felt like for me. This is a documentation of my own becoming. And so more important than how I was, what website I was sharing it on or whatever, it was the story behind it. It was this humanity coming through of, here's someone who's trying to figure this out, and inviting anyone else who's in that boat to join me. So I found that was, so be willing to learn in public. And it's something I'm still continuing to do. So this will be recorded, and I'll cringe a few years later because I'm like, oh God, it was so bad. But I'm learning in public, and I'm trying to be. The other, so I wanted to share, and so kind of around the same time I started writing, I read Walden by Henry David Thoreau. I don't know if anyone's read it. It's amazing. About 20% of it's amazing, and then 80% is him just meditating on like beavers and frogs and the seasons. But there's like gems like this one, and this is Thoreau's describing why he went into the woods. And he said, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. So this one, like, I get this guy. I didn't necessarily enter the woods like he did, but I was entering my own woods. And so this guy really resonated. And then I came across this other quote. This is Mary Oliver, actually from Cleveland, Ohio. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Whew, Jesus, Mary. Really hit home. But I understood what they were after, because I feel like it was the same thing that I was after. Sorry for the font stuff. I think something didn't translate. So the other thing I'd like to share is, and this is kind of related to Mary Oliver and Henry David Thoreau, is a willingness to ask these big questions. And I'm a quotes guy, so here's another one. So this is David White. This is he's a poet. Why are we, the one terrible part of creation, privileged to refuse our flowering? Why are we, the one terrible part of creation, privileged to refuse our flowering? Now, this is from a book called Nature and the Human Soul by a guy named Bill Plotkin. And basically the premise of this book, there's a few of them, but one of them is this idea of nature and humans. And we've created largely these worlds where the two are separated. There's nature, the wild world, and then there's us. And we create, just look around. I mean, and I'm not saying we all need to go and throw it up in the woods, but, we've achieved comfort, and it's really great. It's allowed us to flourish. But the idea that these two are separate is actually kind of a ridiculous notion, and we've forgotten that actually we're cut from the same thread. And so that's a big part of the book. The other thing is, and this kind of hints to this quote here, is when we look at the natural world, we look at a tree, we look at a fox, we look at whatever. You don't see like foxes and bears and tuna fish and crickets like questioning like, oh man, who am I meant to become? Why am I here? What am I doing here? What's my purpose? The humans, and this is maybe one of the things that separates us, we are that terrible part of creation that not only can refuse our flowering, but not even sure what we're meant to flower into. And so while the tree doesn't question whether it's to become a tree, the bear doesn't question whether it's to become a bear, we question who are we meant to become? Not only as a human, but individually, like who am I? Who am I? And so these are the big questions, and they really, if they make your head hurt, which I hope they do, like they're terrible questions. We're terrible parts of creation. Bill, and I love this book, by the way, it's really dense, so I don't recommend it for everyone, but I'll try to describe a little bit of it. But another premise is that he believes that society is stuck in perpetual adolescence. And what he would say, the goal of adolescence is to fit in socioeconomically. And so if we're not a crazy person on the street, we've nailed adolescence. Like, we kind of fit in. If we're somewhat successful in the work that we do, as in we have a little community, even if it's a fringe community, we've really nailed adolescence. We fit in a way that's enabled us to succeed and flourish. And if we've managed to not be a crazy person on the street, if we've managed to be somewhat successful in whatever it is we do in society, and if we're able to do that while staying more or less authentically ourselves, as in not selling our complete soul to something that's not for us, but it's more or less, I'm authentic. In society, I'm not a crazy person. then we've nailed adolescence in the healthiest way possible. The problem is, that Bill says, is that that's where a lot of society stops. Is that when we hit that, it's like, okay, this person lived a great life, they were successful in what they did, maybe they gave back a bit, but that person was a success. The problem is that maybe they haven't flowered into what has the potential to be a mature adult. And what Bill says is similar to kind of what David White is saying, is that these big life questions are nature's way of saying, hey, it's time to become something bigger. It's time to flower. It's trying to learn what it is that you're meant to become, what it is you're meant to flower into. And so not only when we face these big life questions, they're really scary because at the other end of those questions is a deep abyss of darkness, of scary things, of the unknown, of discomfort, complete discomfort. And so, to say yes to those, and this is what Joseph Campbell in The Hero's Journey would say, a call to your adventure. And when you hear those big questions and you feel called to do something more, and you actually say yes to that, and say, yes, okay, I am going to embrace these big life questions, even though they mean I'm probably going to go into a darker place, because it's complete unknown. I'm going to question everything. All these identities that I was born with, I'm going to question them all. And that's saying yes to your adventure. That is accepting, okay, I'm going to try to see what I'm meant to flower into. And so that's a big premise of this book, is moving from adolescence into mature adulthood. Obviously, easier said than done. And there's a few different things that archetypes he talks about. One is in adolescence. One is the conformist, and one's the rebel. And maybe some of you kind of fit on both ends at some point. I certainly resonate with the conformist. And the conformist says, I don't know who I am, but I'm just going to do what everyone else is doing because I don't know of an alternative. While the rebel says, I don't know who I am, but fuck what everyone else is doing, and I'm going to reject it all. Meanwhile, someone who's ready to kind of accept their flowering or go into these big questions says, I don't know who I am, but I'm going to try to find out, and I'm going to flail at this thing, and I'm going to go maybe into a darker place trying to find out. And when we say yes to that, we're potentially about to go into this David White's, maybe accepting our flowering or figuring out what that is. And so when we ask and commit to big life questions, and Bill would say this too, or actually I'm stealing this from Bill, and I believe it because it resonates, is that that's a part of being human, is to not only acknowledge these big life questions, but to say yes to them, even if they are scary to go into. Do I have everyone still? It's pretty philosophical, but hopefully we're still together. So number 3, to know our role as humans. So what indigenous-based people would do, when they would notice their adolescents would be asking these big life questions, or maybe there was a time in life where kind of all of them would be going through this, they would send their adolescents on something called a vision quest. And a vision quest is taken from Native American, but actually if you look at almost all indigenous cultures, which if we go back in our own history, it's where we've all originated at some point, nature-based people, is that they all kind of have this practice of this vision quest. And the idea of the vision quest is you would fast from food and from humans for a number of days, 3-4 days or so, maybe longer. And so I actually had the privilege to go on a vision quest a couple months ago, which is really, really crazy. I can't really go into much of it because I'm still understanding it myself. But the idea is that in many societies, not our modern society, unfortunately, they would have these rituals, these practices, these rites of passage that would help their adolescents go through and ask these big questions. And the other part of the vision quest is that, actually I want to tell a story. So on the vision quest, one of my guides, and this actually goes to this point, he was telling a story from the Navajo people, which is a Native American culture. And all the creatures in all of the animal kingdom were sitting around a campfire. And one by one, they would stand up to the campfire, and they would announce to the group with everyone else, all the other animals witnessing, and they would say, "This is who I am, and here's my purpose." And so one by one, they go to the rabbit, the eagle, the bear, I guess the fish, I don't know. This story, don't fact check the story. But would come to the fire and they would say, "I'm a rabbit, I eat grass and flowers, I hop around, I aerate the soil as I dig and hop around, I'm food for the wolf, and maybe some animals." So they'd go around like this. All the animals. And so sunrise was about to come and all the animals had gone except one, the human. And so the humans turn and all the other animals look at the human, and he or she is sitting in the corner weeping. And like, "Why are you crying?" He's like, "Well, I have no idea who I am. I don't know where I fit into everything." And all the animals just start laughing at the human. They're like, "Are you kidding? You don't know who you are. You must be joking. You actually have the most important role of all of us. You can see the whole picture. You're the only creature that can see the whole spectrum, can see the whole ecosystem, how it all fits together. And so that's your role as human." And so this idea of knowing our role as a human, and wow, how wonderful and what a responsibility that is too, to know that we are a creature that can see how it all fits together. There's no other creature that can do that. And so to know that we have this full spectrum, and actually the question off of that is then what are we going to do about that? Campfire, slide, everything's good. So, and this kind of, so the last thought is that the Vision Quest is a solo endeavor. You go alone, you're by yourself, you're in your own solitude, you're in your loneliness, you're surrounded just by the natural world. You don't see a human for 3 days, you don't eat for 3-4 days. But the purpose of the Vision Quest isn't to stay in the spot. It's not to stay in your solitude. The purpose of the Vision Quest, and they would send their adolescents onto these Vision Quests, is not for egotistical or purely individual reasons. It would be, our people are suffering, bring back a vision to help our people. What vision have you brought back? So on the flip side of going deep into that well, deep into that individual cave, is not just purely for that individual, but what are you actually bringing back for your people? What are you giving? What gift are you here to give? And so the last thing I want to say is really all of these things, whether it's asking the big questions, learning in public, and knowing our broad view of how our role in all of the universe and with all the animal kingdom is to connect. Not only to all of that, but to each other. And so, when I was preparing for this, or a couple of weeks ago, when Vicky asked me, one of the first things I did was, okay, there's a huge topic I have to speak of. I'm going to just post it to Facebook. And so I posted to Facebook, and the question I asked, I just said, what's the most beautiful part of being human? And some 40-odd people chimed in, and which is really incredible, and I think a microcosm of what it means to connect. And I'm looking at people who I know from childhood in Ohio, people who I work with in London, people who I met once in some random city, people who I've never met before. And for one moment, we're having a conversation about a big question. We're forming a small community, and we're connecting around something. And that, to me, I think that sums up perhaps the most magical part of connection and why we do all this, is that all of us, we can connect. Small communities can connect around big questions, and we can talk about it. So I'm actually not done yet, but yeah, again, these are just thoughts, but really, I hope that they spark some questions within all of you. Going back to the work that I do at Escape the City. So we have these programs that people who are feeling unfulfilled in their work, we come and we come together. And really this idea of connection is, beside the education, and yes, we have great speakers, it's this idea of connecting, coming together, and talking about these big questions. And I think something bigger is going on here. More and more people are coming to our stuff. I find these conversations are happening more frequently, more often, these big life conversations. And so, on the flip side of, wow, isn't this magical? Isn't all this stuff, this ability to question, this ability to connect, isn't that magical? On the flip side of that, I want to offer, wow, what a responsibility too. And what are we going to do about that? What are we going to do? The fact that we're human, that we can ask these big questions, that we can learn in public. We live in times where we can show ourselves and we can connect over this ability to learn in public. And we do have this wider spectrum. We can see the whole ecosystem. And so I guess the thought I just want to leave with, and I'll open to some questions too, is what are we going to do with that? And open question. So thank you all.